Arizona 2007. A case that haunted a quiet desert town for nearly 2 decades has finally been solved, and the arrest has sent shockwaves through the community. Her name was Marissa Claire Reynolds, 24 years old. A vibrant young woman with a contagious laugh and a sharp mind, Marissa worked as a social worker in Phoenix, dedicating herself to helping families struggling with homelessness and addiction. She had a way of seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. But on the night of September 14, 2007, Marissa disappeared. Her car, a cherry red Toyota Corolla, was found abandoned near a desolate stretch of desert road east of Mesa. Engine running, keys in the ignition, her purse and phone left on the passenger seat. Marissa was gone. What followed over the next several weeks was a relentless search that gripped her town, only to fade into silence as leads dried up. Witnesses failed to materialize, and the desert swallowed all evidence of what had happened to her. Rumors circulated, speculation ran rampant, and yet the truth remained elusive, hidden beneath years of dust, neglect, and unanswered questions, until a single DNA breakthrough in 2025 reopened the case, tearing open the past and exposing a chilling secret long buried in the Arizona desert. Marissa was the kind of person who left a mark on everyone she met. Friends described her as fearless but kind, driven but grounded. She had grown up in Scottsdale, a city of wide streets, palm-lined neighborhoods, and sun-baked parks. Her parents, Thomas and Elaine Reynolds, ran a small but respected family-owned bookstore. They were the kind of people who greeted neighbors by name, who hosted summer barbecues, who offered anyone a seat at the kitchen table. Marissa's younger brother, Jeremy, often joked that she had a heart too big for the world, but everyone around her understood what he meant. From a young age, she had shown empathy, curiosity, and a determination to help others. She volunteered at local shelters, tutored children, and organized neighborhood cleanups. Her compassion was matched by a keen intellect. She excelled academically, graduated early from high school, and pursued a degree in social work at Arizona State University, determined to make a tangible difference in her community. By 2007, Marissa had carved out a meaningful life in Phoenix. She lived in a modest apartment with her roommate and close friend, Lila, who described her as endlessly patient and endlessly energetic. Marissa's routine revolved around her clients. Her volunteer work and occasional evenings spent photographing desert landscapes. Photography was more than a hobby. It was a way for her to decompress, to process the emotional weight of her job, and to capture fleeting moments of beauty in a harsh, sun-drenched environment. On September 14th, Marissa had planned to meet with a young family she was helping secure housing through a state program. She left her apartment around 5 p.m., calling her mother briefly to let her know she would be late, but that everything was fine. That would be the last anyone heard from her. When Marissa didn't return home that evening, concern quickly escalated. Lila called repeatedly, leaving messages that went unanswered. By 10 p.m., she contacted the Phoenix Police Department, and a missing persons report was filed. Officers retraced Marissa's steps, speaking with co-workers, clients, neighbors, and anyone who might have seen her along the route from her apartment to the desert road east of Mesa. Initial leads were sparse. A few drivers reported seeing a red Corolla parked along the edge of the road, but no one saw Marissa herself. There were no signs of struggle, no abandoned belongings beyond what had been left in her car. The desert, vast and indifferent, offered no clues. Detectives combed through Marissa's apartment, searching for any indication that she had planned to leave or that someone had lured her away. Her personal effects were in order, her schedule intact, and there were no threats or warnings in her emails or phone records. Friends described her as cautious, aware of her surroundings and careful in her dealings with others. She was independent but never reckless. Yet someone had intervened that night, leaving no trace beyond the empty car, and the community was left with an impossible question. Who would want to harm someone like Marissa, and why? The investigation initially focused on known associates, co-workers, and acquaintances in her social work network. Background checks, interviews, and surveillance footage were reviewed. Nothing connected directly to her disappearance. The case received media attention, but within weeks public interest waned. The Arizona Republic ran stories highlighting her dedication to helping families, urging anyone with information to come forward. Flyers were distributed in Mesa, Gilbert, and surrounding towns, yet despite every effort, the trail went cold. 2 weeks later, a faint clue emerged, one that offered hope but no answers. A hiker, exploring a remote wash about 5 miles from where Marissa's car had been found, noticed a piece of torn fabric snagged on a cactus. They alerted authorities, who quickly cordoned off the area. Search teams combed the terrain, but the fabric was the only item recovered. It matched a jacket Marissa was known to wear, but beyond that, no additional evidence was located. It was as if the desert had swallowed her whole. Over the following months, detectives pursued every possible lead. They re-interviewed clients and friends, investigated tips of suspicious vehicles, and analyzed her phone records. The last known call had been placed to an unknown number at 6:15 p.m., but it provided no identifying information. Financial records, social media accounts, and emails yielded nothing unusual. The possibility that Marissa had been abducted by someone she knew was considered, but no motive could be established. Each lead raised more questions than it answered. By early 2008, frustration and despair began to set in. Marissa's case was classified as a cold case, added to a growing list of unsolved disappearances in Arizona. Her family, desperate for answers, organized vigils, outreach campaigns, and media appearances, but the desert had kept it secret. For nearly a decade, Marissa's absence became part of the background of life in Phoenix. Her parents continued to operate their bookstore. Her brother pursued his career, and friends tried to hold on to the memory of her warmth and determination. But the question of what happened that night remained unanswered. Amid this silence, the landscape of forensic science began to change. Touch DNA, genetic genealogy, and other advanced techniques slowly emerged, offering the possibility that cases once thought unsolvable could now be revisited. Yet Marissa's case remained untouched, a file gathering dust in the Phoenix Police Department's cold case unit. In 2025, nearly 18 years after her disappearance, a statewide initiative aimed at reviewing unsolved homicides and missing persons cases brought Marissa's file back into focus. Forensic specialists were asked to examine previously collected evidence using modern techniques. Among the items reviewed were the piece of fabric recovered from the desert, the interior of her car, and a small notebook found in her apartment detailing her work assignments. What was once dismissed as inconclusive now offered a glimmer of hope. Investigators realized that even the smallest trace, microscopic skin cells on the fabric, residue inside the car, or overlooked fingerprints, might finally tell the story of what happened to Marissa Reynolds. The team assigned to the case approached the evidence with fresh eyes. Specialists used enhanced DNA extraction methods on the desert fabric, focusing on areas likely to have been touched by another person. Within weeks, a partial DNA profile emerged. It was incomplete, but strong enough for genealogical analysis. The profile was entered into law enforcement accessible databases, where analysts began mapping familial connections and building potential family trees that could lead to the unknown suspect. By late 2025, the breakthrough came quietly, almost imperceptibly. Investigators identified a familial link that pointed toward a man who had lived in Mesa at the time of Marissa's disappearance. He had no criminal record, no prior arrests, and had remained largely invisible in the years since 2007. Yet the evidence placed him near the scene that night, and his family history aligned with the partial DNA recovered from the desert fabric. As authorities prepared to move forward, surveillance, background checks, and covert investigations confirmed the focus of the investigation. It was a man who had spent years living quietly, blending into the fabric of suburban Arizona life, a neighbor no one would have suspected. His movements, habits, and associations were analyzed meticulously, and the team obtained a warrant to collect a discarded sample of his DNA for direct comparison. The match, when it came, was conclusive. Marissa Claire Reynolds' disappearance was no longer a mystery. After 18 years, the case that had haunted her family and her community was finally on the path to resolution. The arrest that followed sent shockwaves through Mesa, Phoenix, and beyond, revealing the unsettling truth about how someone so quiet, so ordinary, could conceal a terrible secret for nearly 2 decades. The community that had long mourned, that had whispered her name in hushed tones, would finally begin to understand the story of what happened that night in September 2007. And though nothing could undo the years lost, the arrest marked a beginning, a step toward justice, remembrance, and the hope that no case should ever be forgotten. In the weeks and months following Marissa Reynolds' disappearance, the quiet desert town east of Mesa was gripped by a mixture of fear, hope, and confusion. Friends and family clung to any glimmer of news, while neighbors whispered theories over backyard fences and at church gatherings. The media coverage was relentless in the early days, each headline urging anyone with information to come forward. Young social worker missing in Mesa area. Search for Marissa Reynolds continues. A town holds its breath. Flyers were posted in grocery stores, libraries, and gas stations. Lila, Marissa's roommate and closest confidant, personally delivered hundreds of copies, hoping someone might recognize the urgency in her friend's face. Law enforcement responded quickly at first. Detectives canvassed the neighborhoods near Marissa's apartment and the stretch of desert road where her car had been found. They tracked down every witness who might have seen the red Corolla, from morning commuters to evening joggers, and even delivery drivers who traversed the back roads leading into the desert. Yet each potential lead either vanished into ambiguity or proved false. A few neighbors remembered seeing a vehicle parked in a dusty pull-off area, but no one had seen Marissa get out of the car or speak with anyone. Surveillance cameras from local businesses had captured distant footage of her car earlier in the day, but nothing after she left her apartment. The desert, vast and empty, seemed to have swallowed her whole, leaving only the abandoned Corolla as a silent, haunting signal that something terrible had occurred. Marissa's family and friends became central to the investigation. Her parents, Thomas and Elaine Reynolds, were desperate for information. They retraced her last known steps, spoke with her clients, and opened their home to authorities for interviews and searches. Each day without news deepened their anxiety and grief. Jeremy, her younger brother, oscillated between determination and despair, constantly questioning whether they had overlooked a clue. The missing phone, purse, and Marissa's personal effects became symbols of a larger mystery, tangible reminders of someone's absence and the uncertainty surrounding what had happened to her. Lila, meanwhile, took it upon herself to chronicle Marissa's life and work, compiling photographs, notes, and records of her assignments. She believed that Marissa's meticulous nature might hold a clue, perhaps a meeting scheduled with someone unknown, a family who might have mentioned a suspicious visitor, or even a note tucked into her planner that had been overlooked. Lila pored over every scrap of paper in Marissa's apartment, trying to reconstruct her last hours. She spent late nights comparing calendars, client files, and public records, hoping to uncover a pattern, a meeting, a path that might lead to answers. Detectives considered multiple theories. One suggested that Marissa had encountered someone while traveling to meet a family she was helping, possibly a person who did not want to be photographed or recorded. Another proposed that she might have accidentally stumbled upon a criminal operation in the desert, perhaps illegal dumping, drug activity, or theft, and was silenced to protect a secret. Yet no concrete evidence supported any of these scenarios. There were no threatening messages, no anonymous tips that led anywhere, and no witnesses who could place a person of interest near her at the crucial time. The investigation began to feel like a series of blindfolded searches, each lead ending in frustration. Local news outlets continued coverage, often highlighting Marissa's commitment to helping the most vulnerable members of the community. Stories about her work in shelters and her advocacy for struggling families painted a picture of a woman who had lived with purpose. The public responded with empathy, but as weeks turned into months, the initial urgency faded. For the community, the sense of fear began to transform into sorrow and helplessness. The desert, so central to life in the region, became a symbol of isolation, a vast, indifferent witness to the crime. In 2008, a small, almost forgotten clue emerged. A hiker exploring a dry wash near the desert road discovered a torn piece of fabric snagged on a cactus. Initially, it seemed insignificant, a tiny fragment in a wide expanse of wilderness, but investigators quickly recognized it as part of a jacket Marissa often wore. This discovery renewed hope, yet despite thorough searches of the area, nothing else was found. The fragment was carefully collected, labeled, and stored in evidence, but for all practical purposes, it offered no immediate breakthrough. The desert had kept its secrets well. Marissa's case became a cold case in the following years, officially classified and stored among other unsolved disappearances and homicides. Yet her family refused to give up hope. Thomas and Elaine Reynolds organized annual memorial vigils in Mesa, while Jeremy reached out to reporters and social media, hoping anyone might recall a detail that could crack the case. Lila maintained a personal campaign, speaking at schools, community centers, and local events about Marissa's life and work, using her friend's story to raise awareness about missing persons and the challenges of investigating disappearances in remote areas. Despite the stagnation, law enforcement did not abandon the case entirely. The Phoenix Police Department conducted periodic reviews, re-examining evidence with new technology as it became available. Fingerprints, hair, and fabric samples that had previously been considered inconclusive were stored with the possibility that future methods might extract usable information. Each review highlighted the limitations of the tools available in 2007 and 2008, and the challenge of investigating a disappearance in a vast, sparsely populated area. The desert road where Marissa's car was found remained a haunting landmark, often visited by investigators who retraced her last known steps, hoping to find overlooked clues. By the early 2010s, new technologies began reshaping forensic investigations. Touch DNA, capable of extracting genetic material from minute skin cells, and genealogical databases, which allowed investigators to trace familial connections using publicly submitted DNA profiles, offered hope for cases previously considered unsolvable. Yet Marissa's case remained largely untouched. The fabric fragment from the desert, her personal belongings, and other evidence collected during the initial investigation were stored securely but untested with these modern methods. Throughout this time, Marissa's family lived with a quiet anguish. Each year marked another anniversary of her disappearance, each vigil a reminder of unanswered questions. The media attention had faded, replaced by newer stories, newer tragedies. Yet her parents maintained a steadfast hope. They kept Marissa's bedroom untouched, her photographs on the walls, her belongings carefully arranged. Lila continued to advocate tirelessly, ensuring that the story of Marissa's life, her compassion, and her disappearance was never completely forgotten. In 2015, the Phoenix Police Department officially launched a new cold case unit dedicated to revisiting unsolved disappearances and homicides with fresh eyes and modern forensic methods. The unit prioritized cases with preserved evidence, including Marissa's. investigators recognized that while years had passed, the meticulous preservation of evidence offered a chance to finally uncover the truth. They noted that small, seemingly insignificant items, the fabric fragment, fingerprints on the car door, and traces on personal belongings, could now be analyzed using methods that were unavailable in 2007. By 2020, the technological landscape had shifted dramatically. Private forensic labs specialized in degraded DNA extraction, probabilistic genotyping, and genealogical research had emerged. Cases that had languished for decades suddenly found new life. Investigators across the country were seeing breakthroughs, connecting partial DNA profiles to familial lines and identifying suspects who had previously gone unnoticed. Marissa's case, dormant for nearly 13 years, was added to a statewide review of unsolved disappearances and homicides, a decision that would ultimately change the course of the investigation. During this period, investigators painstakingly revisited every detail. The desert fabric fragment was analyzed using the latest DNA extraction methods, focusing on areas likely to have been touched by another person. Tiny skin cells, once thought useless, now held the potential to reveal a genetic profile. Every other preserved item, her personal notebook, remnants of clothing, and the interior of her abandoned car, was re-examined. The team sought patterns, connections, and traces that might identify the person responsible for her disappearance. Meanwhile, the public's memory of Marissa remained alive, though faint. Local news occasionally revisited the case on anniversaries of her disappearance. Community members continued to whisper her name, recalling the young woman whose life had been dedicated to others, now lost in the sands of time. Friends and family maintained small acts of remembrance, such as placing photographs at memorial sites, organizing quiet gatherings, and writing about her work on social media, ensuring that her story did not vanish entirely. It was during this renewed examination of preserved evidence in 2025 that a critical breakthrough occurred. The fabric fragment, previously thought to yield no DNA, produced a partial profile using advanced touch DNA methods. While incomplete, it was sufficient for genealogical analysis, the first real lead in nearly 2 decades. The DNA profile was uploaded to specialized databases, and investigators began constructing family trees based on genetic matches. The process was painstaking, requiring careful cross-referencing, validation, and elimination of unrelated leads. 3 months into this renewed investigation, a familial connection emerged that directed attention to a man who had been living in Mesa at the time of Marissa's disappearance. He had maintained a low profile in the community, with no prior criminal record and no behavior that would have drawn suspicion. Yet his familial ties aligned with the DNA recovered from the desert fabric. Investigators began tracking his movements, studying his history, and conducting surveillance. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, a silent, methodical progression toward the truth. For Marissa's family, the news of a potential lead was both exhilarating and terrifying. After so many years, the possibility of finally learning what had happened to their daughter was overwhelming. Each detail uncovered by investigators reignited memories of her life, her laughter, her dedication to helping others. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, there was hope that the long silence surrounding her disappearance might soon be broken. By the spring of 2025, investigators had a tangible lead for the first time in 18 years. The touch DNA extracted from the fabric fragment, combined with genealogical analysis, pointed to a man named Victor Lane, who had lived in Mesa at the time of Marissa Reynolds' disappearance. Lane had a clean criminal record, no history of violence, and had largely remained under the radar for nearly 2 decades. Yet the DNA match was compelling, placing him in proximity to Marissa during the critical window when she vanished. Detectives began quietly gathering information about Lane, His work history, presidential addresses and social connections were meticulously traced. Investigators spoke with former neighbors, co-workers, and anyone who might recall his behavior in the early 2000s. A pattern of minor suspicious behavior emerged. He had been known to drive along remote desert roads, frequently spending time in areas near where Marissa's car was found. While these observations alone were circumstantial, when combined with the DNA evidence, they raised serious concern. Lane's movements were cross-referenced with public records, utility bills, and cell phone data from 2007. Investigators even revisited old witness statements, finding subtle consistencies they had overlooked at the time. Surveillance became a crucial tool. Lane still lived in the Mesa area, though he kept a low profile, rarely socializing beyond immediate family. Detectives monitored his routines, looking for opportunities to gather additional evidence without alerting him. They coordinated with federal agencies to examine bank records, credit card activity, and digital footprints that might indicate attempts to conceal movement or assets related to the time of Marissa's disappearance. Every detail, no matter how minor, was scrutinized for potential relevance. During this process, investigators made a second, unexpected discovery. Lane had stored several items in a small storage unit near his residence. With a warrant in hand, authorities accessed the unit and found belongings that raised immediate suspicion. Clothing consistent with the fragments recovered near the desert, camping gear, and several notebooks with handwritten notes documenting daily routines, travel, and occasional observations of neighbors. While the notebooks did not directly reference Marissa, the level of detail about his movements near her last known location suggested that he had spent significant time in areas she had frequented. Concurrently, forensic teams re-examined all preserved physical evidence from Marissa's disappearance. Hair samples, fibers, and minute traces from the Corolla were reanalyzed using modern DNA techniques. One critical finding emerged. A partial DNA profile from the interior of the car matched Lane. Investigators now had two independent DNA points connecting him to the scene, the desert fabric and the vehicle. These findings elevated him from a person of interest to a prime suspect. As the evidence mounted, detectives prepared for a tactical arrest. They understood that Lane was intelligent and cautious, capable of concealing his activities for years. Surveillance had provided insight into his daily patterns, but the arrest required precision to avoid any chance of destruction of evidence or flight. A team of officers coordinated to execute the warrant in the early morning hours, when Lane was most likely to be at home, minimizing risk to both law enforcement and the community. The arrest itself was swift and uneventful. Lane was taken into custody without resistance. During the initial interviews, he claimed ignorance, insisting he had no connection to Marissa Reynolds or her disappearance. Investigators, however, were prepared for this. They presented the DNA evidence, the corroborating notes, and the connection to the desert fabric fragment. While Lane continued to deny involvement, the weight of forensic evidence was undeniable. Over the next several weeks, investigators worked to build a comprehensive case. They revisited every lead from 2007, corroborating witness accounts and digital records with Lane's known movements. They also conducted extensive interviews with family and friends, seeking patterns of behavior that might explain the disappearance. The goal was not only to secure a conviction, but to reconstruct the events of that fateful day for the sake of Marissa's family and the community. Marissa's parents, Thomas and Elaine Reynolds, were cautiously optimistic. After nearly 2 decades, the possibility of answers was finally tangible. They met with detectives regularly, providing insights into Marissa's routines, contacts, and the people she trusted. Lila,